My name is Amanda Shaw, and I'm 32 years old. 3 weeks ago, I pulled my 5-year-old son out of a burning kitchen with my bare hands, and it wasn't the fire that left the deepest mark on our family. It was one text message from a man who's supposed to love him. My son's name is Eli. He's got my husband's crooked smile and my stubborn streak, and after the fire, he's got something else too. Scars running up his left arm and across his shoulder, pink and shiny, the kind that don't fully fade for years. The burn unit at the hospital in Boise told us we were lucky. Lucky. I remember standing in that hallway thinking that word had never sounded so strange in my mouth. 2 weeks after we brought him home, my husband's brother Gary came by for the first time. He hadn't visited the hospital, hadn't called, hadn't sent so much as a card, but he showed up that Sunday with a grocery store cake and a big voice. The kind of uncle who fills a room before he says a word. Eli was excited. He loves Uncle Gary. The loud jokes, the way he tosses him in the air. So my son did what any proud 5-year-old would do. He pulled up his sleeve to show off his scars like they were a badge, like they were something to be proud of instead of something to survive. I watched Gary's face change, just for a second, and I told myself I imagined it. We ate cake. We talked about nothing. Gary left a little early, said he had somewhere to be. I didn't think much of it until that night, when my husband's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. I wasn't trying to look. I want to be honest about that. But the screen lit up right in front of me, and I saw my son's name in the message. And some instinct older than manners made me pick up that phone. The text was from Gary. It read, "Listen, I love the kid, but did you see his arm? He's too much." The message cut off there. 3 dots blinking underneath it, like he was still typing. Still deciding how to finish that sentence about my son. I stood in my kitchen holding my husband's phone with my hand shaking, and I thought about Eli upstairs in his race car pajamas. Already asleep. Already forgetting to be embarrassed about scars he didn't choose and didn't cause. I thought about the hospital hallway, the smell of smoke still stuck somewhere in my memory, the sound Eli made when the nurses first changed his bandages. Too much. 2 words about a 5-year-old who almost didn't make it out of that kitchen. I set the phone down exactly where I found it, screen dark, like I'd never touched it, because I needed time to understand what I was looking at before I decided what to do about it. What I didn't know that night was that this text wasn't the first one Gary had sent about my son. It wasn't even close to the worst thing my husband's family had been saying behind our backs since the day of the fire. And by the time I found out the rest, it wasn't just going to change how I saw my brother-in-law. It was going to change everything about the family I thought I'd married into. For 3 days, I didn't say a word about that text. I went through the motions. School pickup, changing Eli's bandages twice a day, the way the burn unit taught me. Sitting with him while he practiced writing his letters with his good hand. But that sentence sat in my chest like a stone. He's too much. I kept finishing it 100 different ways in my head, and none of them were kind. I'm a claims adjuster for an insurance company here in Boise. 10 years of reading people's stories for a living. Accident reports, damage estimates, the small inconsistencies that tell you when something doesn't add up. It's taught me one thing above everything else. People leave a trail. Words, dates, screenshots. If you're patient enough, the truth always shows up somewhere in writing. So on the 4th night, after my husband Mark fell asleep, I sat at our kitchen table with my own phone and did something I'm not proud of and don't regret. I asked to look through the family group chat, the one Mark's side of the family uses, the one I'd been added to but rarely opened because it was mostly recipe links and birthday reminders. I scrolled back to the week of the fire. The night it happened, I'd sent one update to that chat from the hospital waiting room. Just a few lines. Eli was stable, the surgery went well, and we'd know more about scarring in the morning. I remember typing it with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Gary had replied first. "Thank God. Let us know if you need anything." Simple, kind, even. I'd been grateful for it that night, but underneath that message, in a smaller thread I hadn't noticed before. A side conversation between Gary, his wife Denise, and Mark's mother, Carol. The tone was different. Carol had written, "This family has enough on its plate without another crisis." Denise added, "Some people just seem to attract chaos." And Gary, 2 days before that text about Eli's arm, had written something that made my stomach drop harder than anything else. Mark needs to think about whether this is the life he signed up for. Not how is Eli, not how is Amanda holding up. Whether Mark had signed up for this, like my son's survival was an inconvenience someone needed to reconsider. I sat there in the dark kitchen and read it 3 times. The way I read insurance statements when the numbers don't match the story someone's telling. And I understood something I hadn't let myself understand before. Gary's text wasn't a slip. It wasn't one bad moment from a man caught off guard. It was the tip of something that had been building since the night of the fire, maybe longer. I thought about closing my laptop right then. Some part of me wanted to pretend I hadn't seen any of it, The same way I'd set Mark's phone back down days earlier like I'd never touched it. That old habit of mine, absorb it, stay quiet, keep the peace for everyone but myself. But then I heard something down the hall. Small footsteps, uneven from the bandage still wrapped around his ankle. Eli, awake, standing in the kitchen doorway in his race car pajamas, rubbing his eyes. "Mommy," he said, "does Uncle Gary still like me?" I hadn't told him anything. He hadn't seen the text. And somehow he already knew enough to ask. I knelt down and told him, of course Uncle Gary liked him. And I hated how easily the lie came out, smooth as anything. The way I'd been smoothing things over my whole life. I carried him back to bed, sat with him until his breathing evened out, and then I went back to that kitchen table and made a decision. I wasn't going to pretend anymore. Not for Gary's comfort, not for Carol's peace, not even for Mark's. The next morning, I didn't confront anyone. I did what I do best. I gathered facts. I called my sister-in-law, Denise's cousin, Priya, who I'd always gotten along with at holidays. The kind of relative who tells you the truth because she's never learned to do otherwise. I didn't ask her to gossip. I just asked, gently, if she knew why Gary hadn't come to the hospital. She went quiet for a second, and then she told me something I hadn't expected. Gary had told the extended family that he was giving us space, that hospitals weren't his thing, that he'd rather wait until things calmed down. Meanwhile, in that same week, he'd posted photos from a lake trip with his college buddies, captioned, "Needed this." He hadn't been giving us space. He'd been living his life while my son was in surgery. That evening, I sat Mark down at our kitchen table, the same one where I'd read those messages 3 nights running, and I showed him everything. The side chat, Carol's words, Gary's line about what Mark had signed up for. I watched my husband's face while he read it, and I want to be fair to him here, because this story isn't about tearing a family apart. It's about what happens when someone finally sees clearly. Mark went very still. Then he said something I'll remember for the rest of my life. "I need to call my brother." I expected shouting. I expected the kind of blow-up that happens in movies. What I got instead was quieter and in its own way harder to watch. Mark called Gary and simply asked him to explain the text. Not accused him, asked him. And Gary, caught without time to build the story, admitted it. He said he'd been overwhelmed, that seeing Eli's scars had scared him more than he knew how to handle, that he'd said something cruel because he didn't have the words for something true, that his own fear had come out sounding like judgment of a 5-year-old boy who'd done nothing but survive. It didn't excuse it. Mark told him that plainly, but it explained something, and explanations, I was learning, aren't the same as forgiveness, and they aren't nothing either. What surprised me most wasn't Gary's apology, which came 2 days later, awkward and imperfect over the phone while I listened on speaker. It was Carol. She called the following Sunday, and instead of defending her son the way I'd braced myself for, she was quiet for a long moment and then said, "I said an ugly thing about your family, Amanda. I didn't think anyone would ever read it. Eli asked me if Uncle Gary still likes him," I told her. "He's 5. He shouldn't have had to ask that." There was a silence on the line I understood completely, because I'd lived in silences like that my whole life. And when Carol finally spoke again, her voice had lost every bit of its usual certainty. "What can I do," she asked, "to make sure he never has to ask that again?" I didn't have an answer for Carol right away. Some wounds don't close because someone finally says the right thing on a phone call. But I told her the only thing I knew was true. "Show up," I said. "Not with cake, with time." That's exactly what happened. Slowly, over the weeks that followed, Gary was the first to actually do it. He asked if he could come by on a Tuesday, not a Sunday, not a holiday, just an ordinary afternoon with nothing to perform for anyone. He sat on our living room floor with Eli and asked him, straight out, if he could see his arm again. Eli looked at me first, checking. The way kids do when they're not sure if something is allowed to be okay. I nodded. He pulled up his sleeve. Gary didn't flinch this time. He looked at the scars for a long moment, and then he asked Eli if it hurt when it happened, and if it still hurt now, and what the doctor said about it healing. Real questions. The kind that mean you're actually looking at someone instead of looking away from them. "It's my fire scar," Eli told him. Matter of fact, the way 5-year-olds explain the world. I'm not too much. I'm brave. I don't know exactly what Eli had overheard, or pieced together, or simply felt in the air of our house those past weeks. Kids know more than we give them credit for. But watching Gary's face when his own nephew handed his cruel words back to him, gently, without even understanding the weight of what he was doing, is something I will carry for the rest of my life. Gary told him he was right. He told him he was sorry for ever making him feel otherwise. And then, because he's still Gary, still the loud uncle who fills a room, he picked Eli up onto his shoulders and declared him the bravest kid in Idaho. And Eli laughed the kind of laugh that had been missing from our house since the night of the fire. Carol started coming by too. Not with speeches, just with small things. She learned how to help change a bandage without wincing. She started asking me how I was doing. Not just Eli, which was new for her. And honestly, new for me to let anyone do. As for me, I stopped being the quiet one who reads the room and swallows what she finds there. I told Mark's family, plainly and without apology, that our house would always be open. But it would only be open to people who showed up for Eli exactly as he is, scars included. Nobody argued with that. I think, in their own way, they'd been waiting for someone to finally say it out loud. 6 months later, Eli's scars have started to fade the way the doctors promised, pink softening towards silver. And some Sundays now, our kitchen is loud again, full of Gary's terrible jokes and Carol's cooking and Mark laughing at both of them. Eli still shows off his arm sometimes, not because he has to prove anything, but because he's proud of it. It's proof he's here. He told me the other night, half asleep, that his scar was his favorite part of himself. Because I got brave from it, he said. I think about that text sometimes. He's too much. My son was never too much. He was exactly enough to teach his whole family what love is supposed to look like, scars and all.